the two biggest concepts that I want to talk about as a general overview is, first off, you want to do some research. And this is really the scientific method that you use with anything that you're trying to adjust or improve upon. And so the first step is find a starting point. Find out who has already done some research on whatever topic you're going to do. And that will give you kind of a starting point for moving forward. And then the second main concept is apply whatever you are learning to yourself. Use yourself as a scientific experiment, and then that will allow you to make the little adjustments along the way. Because the research is going to give you what has worked for the average, or a starting point for the research. Maybe they have future implications that they haven't really gone into detail yet, and that's usually where N=1 comes in, where you can use yourself as kind of the next step for whatever you're working on. And so the big concept I want to go over with that is biofeedback. It's probably a term that you've heard a lot of, especially recently. There's some big names that are working on this, like the Flow Genome Project, which I'll go over a little bit later. And then names like Tim Ferriss, if you've heard him. He's got the 4-hour work week, 4-hour body. Essentially, they're trying to find ways is how can we integrate the information that we have with the technology available now to save time, improve performance, or kind of get a little bit better thumb on the way that we're doing things. So again, we're just trying to aim small and miss small by using biofeedback. And so some examples of biofeedback would be different types of apps that you see on the phones, like the little Apple Watch that has heart rate monitor, it tracks your sleep, it tracks your you can track your calories and stuff, those kind of apps that you can download. That's what biofeedback is. We're getting information about how the organism, our body, is working in space, and then by using that information we can make adjustments and tweak performance and get a little bit more out of the system. So the kind of topic that encompasses is flow state. So everybody has usually heard the term, especially in athletic performance, sports psychology, of flow, or here in the zone. For example, like Michael Jordan, when he's got the 3 seconds left, how does he make that game-winning shot every time? Or in other areas of different types of performance, like dance or music, or writing is another good one, where people will get into a flow state. And so that's what we're going to talk about first. And the 4 variables that induce the non-ordinary state of consciousness, altered state of consciousness, are selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And I'll go over those. But just to give you guys a basic definition of the flow state, or non-ordinary state of consciousness, we're thinking of states that are characterized by dramatic perceptual changes, intense and often unusual emotions, profound alterations in thought processing and behavior, and they can occur or be induced by a variety of different techniques or occur spontaneously in the middle of everyday life. So we can think of some basic examples by using these 4 variables: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. So I'm going to go through kind of 3 different areas to give you guys some examples with fitness, careers, and relationships. So that way you can kind of understand and apply this information. Again, that's the biggest thing. And so if you guys have questions or anything, feel free to just stop me. We'll go over it, and I'll get you guys involved a little bit on different examples of what you think would fit under those categories. But the first one, selflessness, we're thinking about when you're in that state of flow. Gary actually brought it up somewhat in the speech earlier if you were there, where you dissolve your separation from the environment, from the activity, where you kind of become part of whatever you're doing. Like if you hear the example, like become like you are the ball when you're throwing the ball, or you become the implement, the bat that you're swinging, or the golf club, whatever it is. It becomes an extension of you, because you're dissolving that kind of physical objective layer that you normally use as a cognitive process to differentiate yourself from the environment. When you you start to dissolve that, you start to come into that state of selflessness. And so, a good example for this would be yoga, where they say yoga means to yoke or union. That's this concept where we're dissolving the separation. We're becoming one with whatever the activity is that we're doing. So that's one of the main concepts of flow state. We're silencing that monkey mind and we're bringing our attention into the present moment. So all your attention isn't diverted to 10 different things, what you're eating for lunch later, like if you fed the cat in the morning before you left, all of that extra attention, that 2%, that 5%, all comes into that activity. So your attention is higher, you're more engaged in that present moment, which is going to improve your cognitive processing. Just like a computer, if you have a higher processor, you're going to be able to synthesize more data at one time. So that's the idea of selflessness, is coming into that present moment, being fully engaged. And a good quote that I just wanted to throw in there for this, because I love Bruce Lee, is the quote, which I'm sure a lot of you heard, is, "Be water." He says, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. You put water into the cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into the bottle, it becomes the bottle. Put water into the teapot, it becomes the teapot." Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. So the idea here is you're taking away your context and you're fitting yourself into whatever you need to for that activity or task that you're performing. So you can be gentle and flow into the cup, take the shape of the cup, or you can think of something like a tsunami where you have, an extreme amount of force directed into one channel. So that's the idea of this, is taking away your objective understanding and context of everything else and just being there in that moment. The second one is timelessness. So timelessness, you'll often hear athletes talk about when they're in this flow state, when they're in the zone, everything slows down. The environment becomes slow motion. A great example is when you see, high activity sports like baseball, where the pitch all of a sudden comes and they just see this giant watermelon coming out of it instead of this little fastball that burns in there. Everything kind of slows down. And that's coming back to our selflessness. You have higher processing. So even though it seems like everything's going slower, it's actually you going faster. You're processing data in that given amount of time, which is allowing you to move faster, essentially, react faster to your environment. So it gives you that kind of slow motion feel. And you'll hear people say usually like time flies. When you're really engaged in an activity, whether it be sports related or anything that you're immersed in fully, you will have that sense of timelessness. Where time flies when you're having fun. A couple hours go by because you weren't paying attention to anything else. You were focused in on that moment. And that's, again, another part of the flow state. And the third one, effortlessness, is where the subject will often account that they weren't trying to perform the activity. They were just allowing themselves to react off of their instincts. They were just going with the flow. And this, the kind of quote that I use on this one is, you'll say like, "Don't do, just be." And that's, again, the idea that you're more immersed in the activity, so you're not trying to think about what to do next and then create that sequential order. Like, for example, with the baseball coming at you, you're not thinking about turning your hips and then breaking the wrists and, keeping your chin down when you're on the ball. Everything is just one complete motion. You swing through without even thinking about it, and you hit that home run. And that's that kind of effortlessness that, again, is one of the key characteristics of our flow state. And then the fourth one, the last one, is richness. And this is where people will often record a heightened state of awareness. They have a better memory, better association of whatever that event is, because they're, again, looking back at the other three, they're more engaged in that moment. They're not diverting their attention to other things. So this richness from the environment creates context for them to create a stronger memory. And we know if we can improve the association in the brain, we'll improve our ability to create long-term memory retention. So the more engaged, the more rich the activity, the more our brain is associating all these activities together and storing a more concrete memory of what happened. So I'm just going to give you guys some basic examples of different scenarios. So for the selflessness, two great examples. If we look at it from a career context, completely out of the fitness realm, they use flow state. Flow Genome Project does a lot of research with the military. And you think of the Navy SEALs, and they travel in those small little groups, and the idea is they want to be as zoned in to that flow state as possible because the risks are so high. They need to be able to react perfectly. At the same time, they all have to have synced up, like without saying a word. They know the guy behind them, he's looking to the right. The guy in front of them is looking to the left. And they practice this so much over and over and over that it's just based off instincts for them. They're so used to that pattern that they don't have to think about and process that information. They're just engaged in that moment. You'll often hear the term hive mind. Bees are a similar example where, they know exactly what to do, where to go, and they have this complex integration of tasks that they do based off of this understanding that they're working together in the kind of selflessness state. They have that understanding. If we look at it from a relationship perspective, a good example is empathy. If you are able to take away your preconceived bias about whatever experiences you've had in your life and just be in the moment with that person, be engaged with them, be selfless and just be empathetic, you're going to have more of a connection with that person. You're going to be able to create more of a long-lasting memory, something that has more richness to it because you're absolving yourself from that situation and you're just there in that moment, creating context for the other person. So that's a good example for relationships. And then obviously like we talked about with this, silencing the mind, paying full attention into that moment, taking yourself out of the context of the environment will increase your attention and improve your flow state. So that's a good one for selflessness. For timelessness, a good example is that slow motion when something comes in and you're able to increase your processing, speed up your ability to deal with it. Another couple of good examples outside of fitness is for a career when you're writing, when people will sit down and just start writing. You don't even notice. The pen is on the paper going like crazy and 2 hours go by and you've written, 3 chapters or something, and it was just almost intuitive. You weren't even trying to create anything. You were just letting whatever inspiration, creation flow through you through that time period, and that's when you kind of lose your understanding of that, objective realization of time. When we're looking at relationships, you can think about when you're hanging out with your old friends. And you guys can sit on the couch. I mean, anybody me that Jessica does and do it, they understand I can talk all day long. So when you are in good company and you're sharing old memories and stories, the time can really go by and you don't realize that you've spent an hour catching up on old stories. And again, it's because you're engaged in that moment. You are not processing a bunch of other data, so you're able to focus and engage. When we look at effortlessness, this is often the kind of instinctual routine that you'll see, like for fitness, a great example is Cirque du Soleil. They do the same routine hundreds of times flawlessly. They're perfect every single time. They never mess up because they have practiced that routine over and over and over, and it's just perfect clockwork to them. There's no effort involved. They're just completely going off of that trained instinct that they've built. They've proved those motor patterns.
Would you say that's like a highly performing flow state, optimal flow state, or would you say that?
For Cirque du Soleil?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they have to be, and it's really the similar example as with the Navy SEALs, they have to know where that other person is going to be. And as opposed to, trying to think about, like, oh, I got to put my hand here, and, they've done that already so many times that when they get to it, it's just a natural flow state for them. Kung Fu is another really good example of any kind of martial arts where, especially going off the Mike Tyson quote, it's like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. When something goes wrong and it takes you out of that routine, do you have the ability to maintain that flow state, and that's what will continue to guide you. And that's where we use biofeedback too. When you have an issue or some sort of variable, if you have the ability to adjust that variable and control it, it's like a GPS system. Like when you have that sleep app on your phone and you get 5 hours of sleep and you feel like crap the next day, then that gives you a little bit of an understanding. Like, oh, I'm a little bit left. I got 7 hours. Oh, I felt way better today. And my sleep app said I didn't wake up a bunch or whatever it is. Tracking your nutrition is another good example.
So this may be like a bigger question than time a lot of it. How do you, I guess, develop the flow state? Like, how do you get better at it? Is it more of like you keep doing the same things over and to where like, you're getting near perfection, or do you have to like set time aside?
No, yeah, that's a great question. And there is no solid answer, and that's what's so cool about the flow state is as long as these variables are getting checked off, the application is totally individual. And if you think about it, if we look at these different variables, they can come up in anything. A big example that they use in sports, somebody that's mountain biking down a hill. Same idea as Cirque du Soleil, or the Navy SEALs. One wrong move, and you could die, or serious injury, some big problem. And so how do you practice getting into that flow state? And I mean, that's different for everybody. And you could list a bunch of different ways, and that's what's cool, is that's where the current research is going right now. Because it's really hard to be like, this is the way, this is it. Everybody that does yoga will get into flow state. You get somebody that goes up there, like Dmitry Klokov, a powerlifter, somebody who's like, this is dumb, voodoo stuff. And then you take someone and put them on a mountain bike on the top of a mountain, and they're like, no, dude, no thanks, not doing that. So you can't do a one-size-fits-all. But as long as you're implementing these variables and using the technology, that's what's going to help you. Because everybody's going to have a different way to get there. And if you use the technology to kind of keep you on that GPS, you'll find your own way to get into that flow state. I'm actually going to go a little bit more into that specifically for exercise and motor learning and performance. I'll get into that in the next thing. Great question, because it's so widely applicable. And that's why this is like a really vague kind of like umbrella that I'm presenting with you. Because as long as you're like, okay, I felt this, time was slowed down, I had a really rich experience. It could be reading a book, it could be walking in the park with your grandma. It doesn't matter what the activity is, it's how your brain is processing the environment at that given time for that task, whatever it is. That's the last one here, the richness. Just a good example of that. I forgot, for the relationships, for effortlessness. A good example is when you can say, like, I feel so comfortable around you. I can be myself. You don't have to try to act like somebody else. You don't have to put this personality on. Usually when you're with your best friend, you're the goofiest, right? Because you're not trying to like keep up this persona or personality that you've created, this mask that you put on. You're able to just relax and not try, just be. You're just who you really are. And those are usually the best relationships that you have, is where you can create that connection with somebody because you're being authentic. And that's something that's super important when it comes to training or engaging with other people in general, is you want to make sure that there's that authenticity. So that would be an example for effortlessness for relationships. When we come to richness, the good example for fitness is bringing back that memory of that championship game. Or Dr. Beller, one of the instructors at WSU, she always uses the example. She would go into the Smith gym, and she said the smell of the wood in that gym immediately takes her back to the first time, like the creaky wood floor. And the smell of just that like musty, that just, it takes you back to like whatever that memory is. Or another good example for me was like the smell of, as gross as it sounds, football pads. And I was like, you let them sit in your car, and it's a summer day, you got 2-a-days, and you open that thing up, you won't forget that smell. That's a swampy smell. So, and that's where the senses are creating more associations with your environment, and the more engaged you are in that activity and the less attention you have spread apart to other things, the more those neural associations will occur. You'll have a stronger connection with that one smell, that one sound, and that one, you know, visual image that you see that like takes you right back to that day. And you can remember that moment so clearly and vividly because you have such a strong neural association with it. Because there wasn't anything else that you were thinking about at that time. It was just that one thing. So it really put a strong memory down in your brain. So that's a good example for exercise or fitness, sports. A good one for relationships is when you are, you know, especially in the early stages of your relationship, you've got that puppy love, that love drunk, where you could go out and it doesn't even matter, babe. I don't even see the other girls. I only see you. You know, you're so involved that you've got tunnel vision. That exact same concept is happening where the focus is all in just those eyes. You know, you can just like stare into her eyes for an hour, you know, get lost in that. And that's where you're creating that rich experience. You're negating any of these kind of outside stimuli, and you're focusing on really cementing a strong association with that one thing. A good book recommendation that goes into that kind of focus, the one things by Gary Keller. It's a really good book, and basically talks about how we don't multitask well, and that's usually not how information is processed in general, even with computers. Computers can just go back and forth between tasks a lot faster, so it seems like they're doing simultaneous tasks, but they're actually doing the same thing that we do. They're going back and forth. So the idea there is to create that one experience, get everything else out of the way, and just lay down that strong experience. Another good example in your career is the day you got promoted, or you got that new job, you know, whatever it is, you know, and you remember the suit you wore to the interview, and you aced that. You remember the question, and you had already prepared for it, and you were in that moment because it was something maybe that was really important to you. You know, it was the dream job that you've been waiting for. So again, you're just eliminating outside variables and creating more context for that one specific event that is going to increase associations across your whole brain, more associations.
So the eliminating the outside variables, dissolving yourself, I've already said that many times, dissolving. And then the use of technology, how do you separate those two but still use them? How do you dissolve yourself from all this, either have the flow state but still know that I have to have a stride length of 16 inches or whatever it's going to be?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. I don't really have that good answer for you because, again, it's so individual, you know, and that's really the key here, which is why I'm providing the context of careers and relationships, is it comes down to awareness and balance. You have to be aware of those different variables in your environment that are either contributing to or taking away from your ability to improve your performance, engage in the activity, increase your probability of flow state. And then the other side of that is being able to manipulate those variables, understand that you have control of them, and that's where balance comes in. We have to be a human being every once in a while. That means that you have to sometimes put yourself in environments you necessarily wouldn't all the time, but B, at the same time, fall back on your habits and your rituals. If you have a strong setup of activities that help you to improve that performance and flow state, your chances of falling off the wagon are much less, and that's really practice over time. And that's, you know, like in tons of spiritual practices all over the place, they talk about that noting in Buddhism, or awareness, that practice of just understanding that, you know, that is affecting me, that is affecting me, that is affecting me, and that's, again, where you said, that's where selflessness comes in, where you realize you're not really separate from anything else, you're integrated into the entire ecosystem. You know, you take one animal, one species out of an ecosystem, it could collapse the whole thing, or you introduce one, and it could collapse the whole thing, or make it thrive. You know, so it really is having the awareness and understanding of that integration with the environment, and then being able to find that balance by making the choices that will either, you know, benefit or take away from whatever you're trying to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the stir, that's flow state. The idea there is, again, just going, use what we have available, but don't rely on it. I think that's kind of a good summation of what you were asking. Because again, we've got the apps, we've got the technology, there's an information overload, It's how can we apply the kind of more traditional practices, kind of the older wisdom into this new modern style of living to create performance. And again, a lot of this stuff is already being researched by people like Tim Ferriss on more of a non-formal level, but he's going around and interviewing the top 50 CEOs, multimillionaires. Tony Robbins has done this as well. Money Master the Game, great book where he goes around and he interviews people to find out, how did you make your millions of dollars? And they come back to these principles where they're like, well, I used the resources available in the modern times, but I also integrated the information that's been passed down through thousands of years to kind of create this new model, this new paradigm where we're taking the best of both worlds. Kind of a funny nickname that I have in performance circle is the modern day monk. And there's a really good book by Pedram Shojai, he's an Oriental medicine doctor, and it's called The Urban Monk. Kind of stole his title. But the idea is take those ancient practices, this wisdom that's been passed down for a really long time. Eat your vegetables, get enough sleep every night. You could tell me ways that get you into flow state, or at least improve your performance, right? You'd be like, well, when I sit down and meditate or sit in silence for 5-10 minutes, I notice my heart rate goes down. I feel a little bit better afterwards. I'm not, freaking out all the time or whatever. If I go to bed before 11 p.m., I seem to sleep better. I can wake up a little earlier and not feel so grumpy anymore.
What was that first name you listed that interviews the CEOs, top 50?
Tim Ferriss and Tony Robbins. Those are two good names, and I've got a couple references on the back of this too that I'll show you in regards to the flow state. A couple good books too. But so that's the idea, is we're just trying to create a better connection, more engagement using awareness and technology to optimize our performance. And it goes completely outside the context of fitness. It's every moment, all the time. Because when you're in a relationship or you're at your job, if you apply those fundamental principles, guess what you're doing? You're creating neural associations. Hebb's law, what gets fired together gets wired together. So as you continue to repeat these actions, your probability of repeating those actions in the future goes up, because your body associates that behavior with whatever value of the outcome. If there's a positive value associated with the activity, guess what? You're going to want to do it again. Negative value associated with the activity, you're going to want to do it again. Touch that hot stove, tell you what, you're going to touch that again. That hurt. You immediately create an association with that. So the more that you can do that throughout the day in different environments, the more you can associate those activities to everything you do all over the place. Get better at your job, you'll get better at your relationships and at your fitness routine at the same time. Get better at fitness, you'll get better at your job and your relationships. It's the same kind of idea. Building a strong body helps you build a strong mind. Working in the gym to increase your physical strength will help you increase your mental strength, your emotional strength outside of the gym. Everything's connected, everything carries over. So again, that's why it's so important to be aware of those little things all day long, regardless of the context. As long as we're applying these 4 things, am I integrated with my environment? Am I removing my preconceived biases, about the world? Circa day, 1600, when the world was flat. And then they were like, hey, wait a second, it's round. All the people that were like, heck no, it's flat, you're wrong. And then one day, the internet, and they proved oh crap, yeah, I was wrong. All those preconceived biases are immediately removed, and a new paradigm, a new processing occurs because they had to remove that previous information that they thought was true. Really, what's true for you is true for you. It doesn't always mean it's right, but as long as you take away yourself and just observe the context of the situation, the environment, you'll be able to make better judgments, and that's going to help you improve your performance. So going into the idea of using this concept of flow state to improve your performance, we kind of talked about the learning already in performance, but in terms of actual motor learning, when we're talking about exercise or fitness, motor tasks, the 2 main variables that you want to consider are challenge and skill. Challenge of the activity or task, and skill of the performer. So we can think about skill being on the y-axis for all of these. Just bear with me with my chicken scratch here. Yeah, dry erasement, yeah, it erases right on the hand. So let's give 3 examples here. We've got and low challenge. So let's just put a dot up here for high skill and a dot down here for low challenge. What would that sound like to you? If you're really good at something that's really easy, it's going to be boring, right? Apathy, boredom. And your flow state area isn't very big because it's just too easy. You're not engaged in the activity. There's not that richness of experience because it's too meaningless. There's the stimulus has been introduced too many times, or it's at too low of an intensity to create that engagement. Then we have the other example here. We've got a low skill and a high challenge, something like that. What would that be referred to? That'd be something like anxiety, right? It's too hard no matter how many times you do it. Everybody's been in this situation or has seen this situation happen, especially with clients. If you're a trainer, then you understand that you can't just bottom squat, knees out, knees out, knees out. And they're thinking like, you just told me 40 different cues, like butt back, knees out, chest up. I'm like holding this weight, I'm like balancing. There's just too much going on. The processing can't keep up. It's trying to bounce from one task to 11 others, and by the time they get back to the first one, they already forgot it. Like if someone tells you their phone number, you break it up into segments. You have to sequentialize things and segment things for your brain to process it and give it present it into the long-term memory. So the idea here between these two is to find a sweet spot where challenge meets skill. And this you'll see if anybody's taken sports psychology. This is a really common concept that helps you to get into flow state. So you can imagine this space in here as your ability or probability to improve your performance and induce a flow state. So if the skill is high and the pressure of the situation, the demand of the task is high, your ability to focus on that task is going to be much higher because you realize you have to step up to the challenge. Like they say, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back on your training. And so that's where the skill comes in. If you have a high enough skill to meet the demand, you will have a higher chance of getting in that flow state. And that goes back to Michael Jordan. He has done that so many times. There's plenty of examples, songwriters and musicians and dancers, where they have done that routine 1,000 times blindfolded. They can do that thing in their sleep. So their ability to get into that flow state is much higher. So that is, again, relevant to more than just fitness. That's really life in general. If your job is boring, guess how hard you're going to try. Like office space. He just doesn't care. TPA reports or whatever, TPX reports. So he just doesn't have any desire to try because it's not challenging enough. Then you get in that situation like where you're doing too many things for work. Like say you're an entrepreneur, like somebody I know, and you're trying to build a business by yourself, and you got to juggle 11 different jobs that you have no idea how to do. And that's where you can get overwhelmed in that state, and a lot of people will shut down because they're falling back on what their training is. And if their training is low in whatever those categories are, that's where they're going to drop to. That's where you hear people choke or crumble under pressure. That's that example right there. Then we come over here where, this is fulfillment, essentially, where you're pushing the pace, but you are good at it. You're a top performer in whatever the activity is, but it's hard enough to keep you engaged constantly. So that's just an example to consider when you're thinking about the activity that you're performing, and again, inside or outside fitness. And so your goal, you could also think of it like a scale. Your goal is to try to balance skill and the challenge to create that perfect balance. When you get into that balance, that's where flow state occurs because you're more apt to meet that demand of whatever it is. You've had the practice, there's the engagement in the activity, and that's when these 4 variables start to kind of mesh together all at once. There's flow state. So the challenge versus skill is definitely something that's important when you're thinking about motor learning and performance with a client. You want to give them something that falls in this category. where they can achieve it, it's attainable, but it's still difficult. Where they have to work at it, they have to really focus, okay, what are those cues again? But it's not too much. And so the key there is to know where they are on the spectrum of skill and where the task is on the spectrum of challenge. If you have that understanding, you can watch them do something and say, for example, they're doing a barbell front squat. There's just too much going on. You know what? Let's wrap that barbell. Let's just grab a light dumbbell. Let's go to the goblet position. Regress to progress. We're putting them in this kind of position, and we need to scale it back a little bit. Because then once they get those reps in practice, then we can increase the demand or the challenge, and then they'll have a better understanding when they come back the second time. So and the same goes on the other side of it. If they're doing something, this happens in the training world especially, as you get closer with your clients, you have better relationships, you'll notice there's more conversation happening. And that's a big part of personal training. That's great. That's what a lot of people want out of the experience. They're paying you to have a relationship as opposed to training. It's not that big of a concern. I had a 71-year-old client that just wanted to get away from her husband for an hour a day. She came in and did TRX bodyweight squats and just talked, no problem. But we know we're over here in that position. She's not trying to get into a flow state. She doesn't care. But when you're thinking about it from a performance context, we want to make sure that it's difficult enough to keep them focused and engaged. If they're sitting there talking the whole time, it's too easy. We need to find a way to increase the difficulty somehow, which is what I'll get into next. So, going into how do we create that kind of step-by-step increase in difficulty to continue to keep them in this flow state. Because as skill goes up, we need to continue to increase difficulty so we can keep them in that nice umbrella. So this is where the concept of progressive overload comes in. And progressive overload, got a corny definition for you, I think, somewhere in here. The gradual and systematic increase in stimulus in order to continually create a response in the organism. So essentially that same idea. The stimulus to continually elicit increased adaptations, you must introduce a new or greater stimulus. And the good example here is someone that's been lifting. You know that, for example, a bench press of 135, if you go in and do that for 10 reps, after 3, 4 months, 5 months down the road, 135 at 10 reps is not going to do anything for you. You're not going to get any more growth out of the tissues because they're like, yawn, boring, that's just too low of a challenge, my skill is too high. So you have to continue to bump up the weight to increase that challenge. And that's usually how you'll see people do it, is they increase the weight. And that's the kind of bigger topic that I want to dive into right now, which is how can we continue to overload the organism or the client to keep them in that flow state. The two main variables that we'll go over, intensity and complexity. So intensity you can think of as physical intensity, physical difficulty, in the sense of adding the three variables here are, and there's more than this too, I'm picking three just because they're easy that we can talk about. Intensity can go up via load or weight, the amount, just like the bench press, 135, let's do 145 next time, then 155, let's continue to just add a break, add a break, add a break. So load is a big one, volume is the other major one. Okay, well you can do 135 for 10 reps, okay, well, let's do it for 12 reps. Okay, 12 reps feels pretty easy, 15. Okay, then maybe 145 back to 10, and 145 to 12, 145 to 15. So volume is another way that you can regulate the progressive overload. The other major one that often gets overlooked is rest intervals. So as opposed to doing 135 times 10, resting for a minute, 135 times 10, resting for a minute, do 135 times 10, rest for 30 seconds, get right back under the bar. You're going to be more physically exerted, metabolic demand is going to increase, and so your ability to push lactate out of the muscle, recirculate oxygen and nutrients into the muscles, and get the carbon dioxide out is going to be much harder because your body's working at a higher rate. Another great example is you put someone under a bar, front squat, or whatever exercise you pick, formless, flawless. Really nice squat, that's a good job, 10 out of 10. Dang, that looks good. Okay, now go run a 400 meter for me. Come back and do another set. They come back, that knee's all bonky, because now you've created more metabolic demand, and now they're processing more things. I gotta breathe. I'm freaking tired. This is way harder this time. My legs are burning. There's so much more information going on in their brain that it makes the exercise more intense. So that's the three main variables to increase intensity. And the complexity comes in with technical difficulty. So how can I make the task more difficult without raising the physical intensity per se? And the three major ones that I'll talk about here, the first one is increase the difficulty of the speed of the exercise. So we can do that in multiple ways, right? If we've got a baseline speed, say they're going 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up, how can we make that harder? Well, we can go faster. We can more explosive force on that exercise is going to demand more energy. And so every rep that you do, you're actually expending more energy because you're recruiting more muscle fibers. You're sending more neural drive through the body. So you're going to create more fatigue. How else can we do that with speed? Slow it down. There we go. You go 5 seconds down, 5 seconds up. Now you're really spending some time under tension on that. As opposed to a set of 10 that will take you in reality, you know, and some of you see them, especially everybody's seen the guys at the gym, they're boom, 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 banging it away. Or you look at like the NFL Combine. The reason that they can get so many reps is because there's a lot of time where they're not actually contracting the muscles. They're not creating any kind of demand on the system. Gravity's doing all the work. And so they're getting a mini break each rep. We slow it down to 5 seconds down, 5 seconds up. Now the whole time the muscle's under load. And so it increases the demand a lot more. It's another good one with speed. It's not really speed per se, but we can incorporate pauses. We can go halfway into a rep, pause, hold for 5 seconds, and then go through. Yeah, you know, it's like, oh, that sucks. And so those are just easy ways where we can regulate the difficulty of an exercise without, you know, overloading the client. You know, maybe they have a great goblet squat, but they don't have the mobility in the wrist to get into a front rack position comfortably, and or barbell's intimidating, or you have limited equipment. You don't have access to raise those. It's a really big one for people that have apartment gyms. If you're writing any kind of programming for someone out of house, then you aren't going to be able to know exactly what kind of equipment they have. And so preparing them with a few of these variables, like, will make it easy for them to adjust things on the fly. Same thing for you, you know, like you go on vacation and visit your family and you're stuck at the LA Fitness and they only have kettlebells that go up to 35 pounds. You're like, well, usually I use a 70. Okay, well, if I go slower and or, you know, increase the other technical variables, I can still use that weight and get that increased demand, that progressive overload, so that I can stay in my flow state and learn and perform at my best. Another good example here is change the position of the load. So we can take the center of mass and move it around, and that alone will create more difficulty for the client. So a great example of this is a Hex Bar, where you stand inside the bar, if you're familiar, and when you look at the center of gravity of the bar, it's right through the middle of the bar. Same thing with a straight bar, right? But the straight bar is in front of you, it's out here. So with a Hex Bar, its center of gravity and your center of gravity are in the exact same line. If anybody's a biomechanics nerd like I am, you would know that this is going to decrease the moment arm. If you decrease the moment arm, you decrease torque. You decrease torque, you decrease the difficulty of the exercise. Which makes sense why using a Hex Bar would be safer for someone to start on than a straight bar, especially if they have any kind of low back issues. Because the moment arm for a straight barbell is out here in front of the body. Your center of gravity is what, right about here, right in front of the hips when we're in this kind of 45-degree angle of the torso. And the bar's out here. So you essentially have to pull the center of gravity of the bar back into your center of gravity. And what is doing that? All the low back posterior chain. But if that bar has the center of gravity where you are, there's no torque. You can stand right up with it, and there won't be any force going to that low back. So that's one example. Another example would be to, again, change the position of the load. Say for free weights like dumbbells, You can have that in your sides, center of gravity right around the hips, right? So if we have the dumbbells here, that's pretty close to the hips. We know that we're pretty close to our center of gravity, so it's going to be easy to manipulate their center of gravity. It's in now, depending on the change in load, where you want to move the weight, will dictate the difficulty of the exercise or the task. So we can take the load here, put it up on the rack position up here. Now all of a sudden there's way more demand on the shoulders. They're having to hold this center of gravity up here as opposed to just letting it dangle down by the sides, kind of like gravity help you out. So that's a really easy way right there where you can take an exercise and progress the difficulty without changing weights, without changing equipment. You can just go from the side right to the top. Another good one, we can go from there, progress it overhead, right? Overhead stability, now we're balancing them, like there's a whole lot more going on. Not only do we have to have the stability to get there, but we have to have the mobility to be able to get those joints to go into the positions that we're asking them to go into, which is much more demanding, which is why oftentimes people complain of shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, wrist injuries, especially through the weight room, because they actually don't have the prerequisites to get into that position. So that's where you have to know, am I putting them into a position where the challenge is great as you are, then you're putting your client at risk for injury. They don't have the ability to do that task yet, so you need to regress the complexity or intensity in a way. If you were to take 5-pound dumbbells and go overhead, probably not too bad, you know, if your shoulders has decent range of motion. But if you give them 50s in that position, that's going to obviously increase the risk. You know, so it's another easy way there. We can then change the lateral position of the center of gravity. It's called offsetting. As opposed to holding a weight here, for example, like a goblet position, we can hold just one weight on the side. We can do it at this side too, down at the hip or up here. All we're trying to do now is create a lateral change.